do, but that's tough to leave early in the morning. I don't miss those, having to get up early any morning. I still have difficulty sleeping late. I try and sleep late from time to time, but it doesn't work. I make myself get up and start doing something. But we have been in a study the last several weeks in the book of Matthew. We're talking about the last week that Jesus is coming into his last week of life here on earth before he's crucified, and that he has been trying to teach those, and he's been talking mostly to the scribes and the Pharisees so everyone else can hear him. But he went in and he cleared the temple. They didn't like what he did, but that was the second time he cleared the temple. He did it at the very first of his, when he started that 3-year time with the apostles trying to teach them, and his 3 years of his ministry, and he did it at the very end again. Last week we discussed some of the things that he had done. We talked about, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about some parables that he was teaching. And then this past week we spoke about some of the things, the difference between the old law and the new law, and he asked questions and finally got to the point where if they couldn't answer his questions, he was not even going to talk to them anymore. And he's already gotten past that point. Now he's supposed to lower the boom on the Pharisees. These comments or remarks that he makes here, that Matthew records us here, of course it's also recorded in the other Gospels, also in Mark 12th chapter and Luke the 20th chapter, it's recorded not exactly like it is in Matthew. He's going to say some things that makes them so mad, they're determined they're going to kill him now. That his leaders, that the leaders of the religious leaders of the day, which is the Pharisees, who have control of most everything, get so mad at what he tells the other people. Now they're listening. They didn't leave. They're hearing what he's saying, but he's warning the people about your religious leaders of the day. And that's where we're going to start in this. We're going to be in chapter 23 this morning. We're going to look at chapter 23. And it starts out, and we're going to stop pretty quick once we get into it. And it says, when Jesus spoke to the multitude and to the disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe. You do that. But do not do according to the works, for they say and do not do. Now, we're talking about Moses' seat. All the synagogues, the places they studied, had a big seat. It was almost like a throne. And that goes all the way back to, let's turn to Exodus 18. Roll back to Exodus 18 right quick. And if someone would read for me Exodus 18, 13 through 16. And this is what it's referring to, is the Moses seat. Exodus 18, 13 through 16.
And it came to pass of the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, what is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws.
Okay, who's responsible for teaching the law at this time that Jesus is speaking? Who's responsible for teaching the law of Moses? Of course, he's still under the law of Moses. We have not moved into the new dispensation yet. Who's responsible for teaching that? Who are the religious leaders of the day? The Pharisees and the Scribes. There is in the elders of their churches, but mostly it's the Scribes and the Pharisees that are responsible. Even as the young men are grown up, they get tutorials from these guys. They become a student of these men that's responsible for teaching all this. A lot of times the fathers didn't know enough about it, but like Paul had the greatest or best teachers of the day, right? These were some of the Scribes and the Pharisees that he had growing up. It was their responsibility to make sure that they had the law down. Now, there is a seat. Remember, Moses was trying to do everything by himself, and he was burning himself out, what we would say today. He couldn't handle all the problems, all these thousands and thousands of people on the Exodus as they came out. So his father-in-law saw the problem that Moses was having from the very get-go and the first of the day, the daylight, till the late hours of late in the evening before dark. Moses sat all day long and listened to problems. Most of the time, what is it about people? They're not going to agree, are they? They want a judgment or want a ruling on something that is going on between the people. And that's what Moses had to sit and do all the time. All day long, day in and day out. And his father-in-law saw the problem that Moses was having. So what was the solution to the problem? Y'all remember? There in Exodus, it says the suggestion that Jesse made to him. You appoint others above you or by you so they can handle the small stuff. You do the small stuff, or let them do the small stuff, and you take care of the big problems that's going to affect all the people. And that's what they did. It's real similar to our court system today. Another word for the Moses seat is the bench. All right? Now, when someone is elected to the bench or appointed to the bench, what are we talking about? Judges. And that's the same thing you get today. We have judges or that rule from the bench. And that's a common concept and that what we hear every day. We know what they're talking about. When the ruling from the bench is today, we know that it was a judge judged that. And that was the concept here. These people in each of the synagogues, especially there in Jerusalem, they sit in those benches. It wasn't always the same person, but it was someone that was supposed to be very knowledgeable of Moses' law. So when someone came to the synagogue to ask questions, they went before the person sitting in Moses' seat. And that's what he's making a reference to right here. The Moses seat. Okay? If someone want to continue to read in verses... and he came back and told him, said, listen, they're telling you what to do, and it's your responsibility to do what God's law says. But what was the problem? What's the term we use today? He used the term hypocrite, but what do we say today? Do as I say, not as I do. And that was what was going on. These guys making these rulings, these Pharisees making these rulings from the bench or from Moses' judgment seat, were telling them to do all these things, but they wouldn't do anything. They were totally right the opposite. And you talking about, do any of y'all remember that you made these mistakes? We all made mistakes with our children growing up. We told them to do something, and we turned around and did something right the opposite. And what was the look on their face when they caught you? We had a difficult time. I can remember the looks on my boys' faces. If I told them to do something, I turned around and did right the opposite. And they have this hurt. It's a hurt look on your face. And it just happens. It happens to people. And we make those mistakes, and we file that in the back of our heads. That I can't do that anymore. I've got to do exactly the same thing I tell those that I care about. And if they ask me for a ruling or an opinion or something to do, and then I turn around and do right the opposite, I'm a hypocrite. And that's what he's fixing to start calling them in a few minutes. These guys were making all these rulings from the bench, but the people could see them doing right the opposite out in the open. So how good was their ruling? Not good at all, is it? We do not want to be a hypocrite like he's fixing to charge them with. Someone start reading in verse 4 for me and read down through, and I'll stop you when I need to. 23, chapter 23, verse 4.
If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray.
No, 23? Matthew 23.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were about to still next.
No, I'm sorry.
Matthew 23, verse 4.
Yes, ma'am.
For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. We'll stop right there.
When they make rulings on some things, it's kind of like one of the religious organizations today that tell you to go do these things, to get yourself right back with God. And then they turn right around, and it makes, sometimes it's so difficult, so hard to do, it's a real burden on people. And a lot of times it involves what? Money. No different back then. They let you pay for things to get them things right. A lot of people didn't have the money to pay. A lot of the people didn't have the things that they were wanting them to do. So there was too much of a burden on these people, and yet they wouldn't help them in any way do what they was asking them to do. And that's what he's saying here. Don't put, or they're putting so much. Now, is Jesus telling them not to do those things? Said you got to go by the law. You got to go. If you're going to go to the synagogue and you're going to go before Moses' seat of judgment, you have to abide by what they say. You take somebody to court today. Do we always get the outcome from the bench that we want to hear? A lot of times it's not even close what we want to hear. But if you go that far, if you go to trial, if you go to want a judge to rule on that, the difference between a judge's rulings and a jury's rulings, right? A judge's ruling is just one person making that, depending upon how that judge is taught, what his ideas of life is about, what kind of things he thinks about the world and people, is what kind of ruling you're going to get. You take your chances of going through, but you have to abide by it, wasn't it? Because once he hits that gavel and he rules by it, in our court system, you can appeal, right? You can still appeal, but it's going to cost you to appeal. And appeal costs a lot of money.
Well, they should have been able to have the rulers, have the laws, and then see the rulers and look to them on how to behave. What Paul says later on, by my doctrine, abide in Christ. Paul followed what God said, so we could follow what Paul said in his actions. Well, that's what these people should be doing as well. They were the leaders, they were the learned men, they knew the scriptures. So you should be able to look at the Scribes and Pharisees and say, this is how I'm supposed to behave, because they knew it and they should have been doing it as well, but that was the problem.
Think about our current political situations we're in today. How many rules that do our government pass over us that do not follow their own rules? I wish I could vote myself a raise whenever we wanted one. Anybody want to take that deal out? I wish I did not have to pay the taxes that they are not having to pay. I wish I could have the gated in nice areas and send my kids to the best schools that I can't. I wish that I could manipulate the rules the way I wanted them to be and not have to follow them. We're in the same boat today, aren't we? Is anything new under the sun? No. They were doing the same thing back then too. Not just the religious leaders of today, but also the Roman government was doing the same thing.
They're the same thing.
Yep. How to enrich yourself, that was happening. But if you go to court and if you have rules over you, God says, and He's always said, follow the rules of the government of the day, even though they're not very good sometimes. Unless what? We've got an exception. If it goes against God's word on what to do. Now, that came about a couple of years ago, if you remember. They were closing down churches, forcing churches not to meet, and arresting people if they went in.
That's right. Yeah, they did.
So what should you have done?
Appeal.
Went anyway. Because that was totally against God's word. He said, you go and meet on the first day of the week. All right? And then we found out later, too, that even though they told us a lot of lies about COVID, they just did. Because they were guessing most of the time, and we pretty much knew that. Now, was it a dangerous disease? Sure it was. So is the flu.
A lot of people died.
A lot of people died, and a lot of people is going to continue to die. We will have something else come along. Y'all remember the big AIDS epidemic when it first started? How it scared everybody, and I can the people in the healthcare system, because that comes from the blood. And I know y'all probably had to have special new training on. Right, I knew you were a critical care nurse, and that's why you started your career. Being on the front line, if someone comes in, it's bleeding all over the place. I had to go through retraining even when I was a teacher. I was trained because I taught shop classes, and the potential for a student being hurt severely in a shop course is a whole lot different than sitting in a math classroom. All right, that potential's there. And I did have students get cut, get things falling on them, things like that, and never had a bad accident. Any of my kids, but I went through a lot of special training that a lot of teachers didn't do. And I remember when the AIDS deal came out, that we had to start rethinking on how we dealt with a student or an individual that you came up on. EMS people, the same thing. If there's blood involved, you got to be extremely careful on how you handle that and how you come in contact with it. So, but it's going to continue to happen. Okay? Do the things that they tell you to do, but don't follow their examples. So, all right. How many times we told our children, because I said so, and can't really give them a reason why? That's because I said so. I'm your parent. You do what I tell you to do. And then sometimes later we come back and say, all right, this is a reason. You need to always, and I didn't always do that, I'll admit.
I don't think you have to always. It's very good to, if you can, that's a teaching moment.
What does it teach? What does it teach? That they don't have today. It teaches authority, doesn't it? It teaches authority, which a lot of the kids are not getting anything about.
It also teaches respect.
Sure, respect and authority, because I told you to do that. So, because they're going to come into contact with people that has authority. Most of the time it's the law, one way or another, that tells them to do something. Well, why? Well, you can't always ask why. It's just because I told you to do that, and there was a reason. They don't have enough time to go into a long explanation to you why to do this. You just need to do it and get on. So, and it saves you a lot of problems.
My children, if they were standing in the street and a fast moving car was coming their way, and I screamed at them, get out of the road. I don't want them to have to take time to explain to them why they need to get out of the road.
Right.
They need to react.
Same thing. There's a little one on stove, just to touch a hot stove or something that's going to hurt them. You just scream out hot, say, "Don't do that! Get out of there, or get away from that." And if you have to say, that's going to burn you, it's going to leave a real bad mark on you, and it's going to be very painful. It's already too late, isn't it? So there are times that you just need to do what you're told. And what is the world teaching about that today? Question everything.
Their rights.
Yeah.
Or they're paying. I mean, it's worse with young adults going to college because I pay for this. I pay you to do that. Well, you pay all you want, but this is our program and you signed up. If you don't like it, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
And that's again, I was talking with someone the other day. It's a fairly new teacher. Was asking me, they were having some problems of discipline in their classroom and stuff. And I told them, I said, don't ever give up your discipline to someone else in your classroom because you've lost all respect from the students. You just can't do that. You can't. I don't care if it's a superintendent. I don't care if it's a principal. Don't ever let them take over your discipline in your classroom. That's why I very rarely sent a student to the office for anything. If I can't take care of it, that student needs to go home. That's the way I always thought. And there was a time, and it was mandatory. If there was two kids fighting in the classroom, it was mandatory. They have to go. And I understood that. That's something you just can't let go. And both of them have to go up there, and then they'll take care of that problem as long as they took care of it. If they didn't take care of it, I was not sending them back. I will take care of it down in my own classroom. And I had very, very few discipline problems, and that's what I was trying to tell them. But the kids are taught today about no respect, no discipline, no anything. And and it's going to continue. That's going to be very difficult to deal with, especially you people. And I feel for you now in education.
I would say that in the last 5 years, behaviors and kids are bringing to school, unlike anything you've ever seen before. Even small, preschool children, small kids. I don't know what it is.
We do too. You know what it is. The parents aren't teaching them, are not taking their responsibility as parents.
That's right.
That's the deal.
It's bad.
Right.
It is. Because things keep growing and they just continue.
Right.
I don't know the answer to that, but it's all over. My sister's a teacher in a whole other area, of the country, Texas. They're seeing it there. I mean, it's just.
It's the whole attitude of the whole country is changing that way. Yeah.
The kids, and I'm making generalizations, not every child, but
A lot more than used to be.
A lot, and it's just like, 3-year-old is like, what? I mean, when I taught fourth graders didn't do that,
Right.
So it really is a struggle, and we got to go back to that respect and the authority of you got to keep it at home.
Jesus is talking about that right here. It says, respect the authority of these guys, even though they may be wrong. They're telling you the right advice, but they're not following their own advice. And that's very difficult for people to do. It is. That had to be very difficult for those people, or he would have never said it.
What about the applied discipline at home now? What are parents, what are they to do?
Well, kids are taught real early, hey, just pick up a phone, call Child Protective Services on their parents. And it happens day in and day out now when they get disciplined at home.
Okay.
So, mine did it one time. I don't think they'd ever pick the phone the second time. Mine threatened, one of mine threatened, I'm going to tell you which one. One of mine threatened to do that one time because they heard it from another kid. And we said, that's fine, you pick that phone up, but all your stuff is going to be out in the yard, and you want to have a room here, and you can go with them, and we won't have to worry about you anymore. And they just, you know, it kind of shocked them. So, but it's not an easy, discipline is not easy, is it? Discipline's not easy in our own lives. We have to continue, I don't care, till the day we die, we have to discipline ourselves to do what we're supposed to do. It's a lifelong skill you have to keep working on. If you don't use the skill, what happens to that skill? You lose it. So it's something that we all continually have to, and he's talking to adults here. Discipline yourself to follow the rules, whether you like them or not. A lot of them we don't like, but we have to discipline ourselves to follow the rules.
Pride gets in the way, and that's, he's going to talk about how that's what this is. But
Exactly.
Pride gets in the way.
Especially if you're one making the rules. Okay, let's continue on, and we're not going to finish this. So, all right, someone read. Where did you stop at, Faye?
Stop at 5, but I'd like to go back to 4.
Okay.
So they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at feast, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi.
All right, let's stop right there.
John, it asks what this word is.
Yes, ma'am. That's what we're fixing to talk about.
P-H-Y-L-A-C-T-E-R-E-I-S.
The phylacteries. All right, that was something that happened in about the 3rd or 4th century. It was not. It goes back to something that God had told the children of Israel to write these things on their hearts and on their minds. Okay, that's where the idea came from. A phylactery is a small leather box that's made by the Jews, and mostly, even today, the Orthodox Jews, the ones that are real strict in the law, that would still dress the same way they dressed 5,000 years ago or whatever, they make the one. There's 2 of them. They come in pairs. One of them is for the arm, and wrapped around his arm, and it's a little leather box that holds scriptures from, and it's only come from 3 places, or 4 different scriptures. It has to come from Exodus 13, 1 through 10, and it has to come through Exodus 11 through 16, the same 13, 11 through 16 verses. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, and 11, 13 through 21. Those scriptures have to come to them, but they can only be so long. Over time, what did Christ fight the whole time about the laws? He said, what laws are you following? They were following traditions. What happens if they start following traditions? The next leaders change the traditions, don't they? To say what they want to. Guess what? The phylacteries was the same deal. They used to be small boxes. They could only have so many verses. And it got so bad, the ribbons that they tied around their arms could be only so wide. The phylacteries had to be black in color. They wore one on the arm and one on their head with a band tied. The way you tied the knot made the difference. That come into the rules that you had today. And the scriptures that went in even had to be written on certain type of parchment. It had to be written with certain type of instruments. So what are they doing to the rules? They keep adding to them and adding to them and adding to them. God never told anybody to wear a box on your head or put a box on your arm to remember his rules. They started doing that, I say, the research I looked at, 3rd or 4th century after the Exodus, they started doing that because he told them, and you can go back, it says to write this on your heart and your mind. So what did they start doing? They started writing it and putting it on their head, so that's their mind, and on their heart, it was close to their hand.
Okay.
So each time they go into their morning worship, even they still do that today, the Jews today, the Orthodox Jews today, before they go to their daily worship, they put these on, strap these on, and tie them to their heads, and even the small boys do it. So that's what a phylactery is, all right? Plus, They were commanded to wear ribbons on their garments to remind them of their daily prayers. What do they do here? All right. You said what? Go back to verse 5.
And make them bigger.
They make them bigger, and they make the ribbons longer to be seen by who? By men. They want to be noticed or recognized for. You see people, and I'm going to have to use this example. You see people wearing crosses today. The small cross. I don't have a problem with those. But some people get them bigger and bigger and bigger so they can be seen to show that, hey, I'm more religious than everybody else around here. Look at me. Pay attention to me. So you got to be careful about that.
Tommy, can you give those verses again?
Okay, the phylacteries, the verses that had to come from the Old Testament was Exodus 13, 1 through 10, 11 through 16. And it couldn't be the whole verse, it had to be small parts of the verse. That was some of the other rules. They told you what parts of the verse you had to put in there. There is nowhere in the Bible or in God's Word said to do that. But they started making these things up as they went. All right? And exactly, and that's what we think of. It was an idea that God was trying to get them, like He does all through the Old Testament, all through the Bible. He gives us examples of what it's like to do. And like I said, it says in Deuteronomy, it says like Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, and in Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21. That's where the verses had to come from. Yes, ma'am.
Was this quote unquote prayer not something that had been commanded in the past, or did
They just started doing it. They just started doing it themselves because they took it literally that God said, write these down and put them. God said, like you would wrap it around your arms and put it on your head. So,
they were in charge, so they could make whatever.
exactly. Those in charge can make their own rules. So, and that's what they did. So, I thought it was pretty interesting. It was the 4th century BC when they started doing that. So a lot of it. But by this time, Christ knew it. And what did they do with them? They made them larger than normal, to be seen. And that's what they did it for. I want you to look at me because I'm a lot more religious than anybody else around here. Okay? Now, we have some religions out there that through their garments during religious ceremonies, what do they do with their garments? They wear all kinds of these huge robes and these huge hats and all that kind of stuff to make them attention toward them, right? So,
Do you know if that tradition has anything to do with Catholics were in the big?
I don't know. I didn't look that up much, so I don't know. And they have rules. I know that they have rules on what they can wear, how big and how shape and all that. It's all kinds of stuff. So they've come up with their own rules and the robes.
You said Deuteronomy 11, 13 through what?
11, 13 through 21. That's where those things are found. All right? And he also says, and they want to be called rabbi, or teacher, which gives them a status, especially if someone's out in the crowd and they hear them call them that. So that's what they wanted to be called by everybody. And how do you know if it's a rabbi? Well, the way they're dressed. So, and they wore different type of clothes, different type of robes than everybody else out in public. All right, verse 8. Someone start in verse 8.
That you do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, Christ. You are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, and he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
Who is it referring to here being called teacher? Christ. He's going to teach them the law that is going to come down. He is the one that's going to be called teacher.
I never knew that it was wrong to call somebody a teacher.
Well, it depends. Again, you got to go back to the Hebrew word. And I looked it up and I forgot to write it down. So I've got to go back and do it. We'll come back to that in 2 weeks. I won't be here next weekend.
Okay.
But we'll go back and why. But we do know that you're not to be called someone father. All right. And yet we have several religious groups that require them to do that. And you're introduced to them as that, and they want you to call them that, but I'm not going to do that. So I always call them Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. whoever, whatever name they gave me. That's just the way I've got to do it. Because we're not told to do that. Or we're told it right here. Christ says don't do that. All right. All he's talking about is Christ. Remember, the whole time Christ is trying to establish his authority, and we've already been through that a couple of weeks ago, his authority and to be the teacher, to bring the word that he's going to be teaching. Now we get to the woes. And there's, if you count them, there's 8 of them, but everybody says 7 woes. There's actually 8 woes in here. But there's 7 and 2 kind of go together. Let's read through the woes. And the woe is like, beware. That's what the word woe means. Beware. Be on guard. Don't make a mistake like you're fixing to make. And that's why he says the word woe, and that's what it means in the Bible. Woe is you're about to mess up. All right? Someone want to read, starting in verse 13, read the first 2 woes down through 14. 13, 14.
But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you desire widows' houses, and for pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation.
All right? He warns them right here. And every time he says a woe, he calls them Pharisees and scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites. He said, you're doing one thing, you're saying one thing, and doing something else. And of course, everybody knew it. Everybody saw it. It wasn't anything new. But they knew these were the guys that were in charge of God's law at the time. So they had to follow them, had to do what they said, even though they didn't like it. All right? He right here tells them, you ain't going to heaven. Now remember what, who was it? Greg last week told us that during his, when he was in school, that a Jewish rabbi came in and told them about, he didn't believe in heaven at the time the way they were talking about it. He said, but if anybody's going, we are. You know, and he was, how arrogant is that? That's pretty arrogant, isn't it? All right? And again, what does it mean that you even devour the widows? What were they doing to the widows? Y'all remember? In other places, it doesn't tell you a whole lot here, but in other.
He did say to devour widows' houses, so I'm assuming it takes everything they have. Mm-hmm.
They were taking everything they had, requiring everything they had, and using it for themselves. Sound familiar? Don't pay your taxes. What's going to happen to you?
You're going to lose your house.
You're going to lose your house. They're going to take it.
Then just about everything can become a woe. Now we know where that slang word "woe is me" came from.
Right, woe is me. Right.
Woe is me.
Yeah. It is. All right, verse 15.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself.
Woo! That's fighting words, isn't it?
That's strong language there.
You'll go all over the world, the known world, sell all over the world to go get those guys and try and bring him back to the Jewish religion, to bring him back into line. But then you'll put all these extra burdens on top of him that he can't do. And you make him just as much more a son of hell. And you're going to take him with you because of what you're doing. Okay? And again, he's hitting home right now on the scribes and Pharisees. He's hammering them very heavy. All right, verse 16, down through 22, please.
Woe to you, blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing. But whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar, sweareth by it, and by all things thereon. And whoso shall swear by the temple sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon.
All right. You remember what was happening? If you made an agreement with somebody that said, I swear by the temple, and not by the gold of the temple, but I swear by the temple, and it comes back and it's time for you to pay up, oh, I didn't swear to the gold of the temple, so it doesn't matter anymore. And that was what was going on all the time. It depended on what. So they made rules, which was crazy rules. If they swear by the gold, then they have to pay it back. If they didn't swear by the gold, they don't have to pay it back.
I had my fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. I had my fingers crossed. Exactly. You got it.
Do it. Yeah.
So exactly the same principle. You know, even though I said it, I had my fingers crossed. It don't count, right? Even though the other person didn't know it. Jesus is telling them what here? If you make an agreement, you make sure that you stand up to that agreement. I don't care what you swore by. You made the agreement. Your word is your bond. And that used to be. Because I remember talking to my granddad and people like that. They didn't make contracts. They didn't write out contracts.
They shook hands.
What made it almost impossible to do anything without a contract now? Lawyers. I'm sorry. They look for loopholes. And then the defense lawyer, it's his job to look for any loopholes against the law to help get you off.
And also the fact that the handshakes not good anymore.
Right. Do you know people today that their word is their bond? I know some people. If they tell you they're going to do something, they're going to do it regardless. But most people, you have to have a contract. And then we've now even found out contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on. Because they turn right around and forget them. You know, oh, this was not part of the contract, or this is not what the person meant. And again, lawyers and law got involved in it, and it's all about money usually. But Jesus says here, if you say, and that's why later he tells them don't swear. Or earlier he already told them don't swear on anything. Don't do that. Let your word be your bond. Okay? Because you will get yourself in trouble making swearing things, on things. 23, please. 23 through 24.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out the gnat and swallow a camel.
All right? They were making people pay tithes on the smallest of issues. Some of these are tiny, tiny seeds. You have to figure out how much you had, then you can pay a tenth of that in tithes back to the temple. They was wanting to tax everything you've got. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Almost everything you've got is going to have a tax on it somewhere. Either you bought it and paid a tax on it, or as you keep it, you have to pay tax on it to our government. And it's not just religious leaders. And we don't tax like that because Christ taught you to do what? Give from the heart as you prospered. We're not going to tithe everything you've got. Now, a lot of people in the church still calls it paying tithes. And I don't have a problem with that because that's where the idea came from. But it's an offering that you have paid or will pay and need to pay because we're commanded to. And he says, you strain out the smallest, stupidest stuff, which that's me talking, not the Bible, all right? And then yet you'll swallow a whole camel, which is so obvious, and let those things go by. And we know lots of people like that. Every time you turn around, they nitpick every single small thing you do, but they don't care about the big stuff, do they? And we're told what? Let the small stuff go and worry about the big stuff. And that's what we're told to do. So he's telling them here, don't be that way. And remember, he is hammering the Pharisees and Scribes, and again, he keeps calling them hypocrites. You do one thing, say one thing, and do something different.
I would say God said back in Hosea that He desires mercy more than sacrifice. You know, they were just picking parts of the law, you know, and just crushing them with it without having that mercy of, okay, I understand, you know, it's hard today. I'll do it next
Right.
time. You know, it's like, no, you didn't do it. You're out of here. And so,
Right.
and that's just goes so much against what God had already been teaching them in the old law.
And we have to be very careful today. We nitpick the scriptures, don't we? The New Testament law. We nitpick those things. We pick out the things we want to enforce and let some of the other things go. Now, we can't be so legalistic that we forget the mercy part of it, the forgiveness part of it. So, got to be careful. Yes, sir.
Could it be also called stubborn righteousness?
I guess, yeah, probably so.
Stubborn righteousness.
Pick what you want, go by what you want, and leave the rest of it alone. And that's most of what he's saying. All right, 25 through, we just read that one. No, is that right? Yeah, 25 through 26.
Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees. I hope I didn't step on anybody's toes.
That's all right.
Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean.
That's a concept we all know about. Ever picked up a cup and took a drink out of it and looked in the cup and go, oh, why didn't I wash that out? It looked fine on the outside, didn't it? Looked very acceptable on the outside. Even when you get them out of the cupboard sometimes. They look clean until you look down in there and there's stuff that's in there because it's been there for such a long time. I do the same thing. Got to be careful about that.
They had those rituals back then.
Sure.
Rituals where it was a whole process.
Before you sat down and ate, you had to wash and cleanse and wash all your utensils, and before you made meals, and again, that's what Christ kept talking about. Y'all made so many rules for people, they can't even follow them anymore. Because if you leave one thing out, they hammer you for it. Okay? Probably so. Probably so. I mean, it was roll up to a stop sign and then come to a complete stop. How many of you look down your speed officer, you're sitting on 75, you're supposed to be doing 70, and didn't even know it. So we break laws all the time and don't realize we're doing them. So the law as it was written, you go by a school and you have a concealed carry.
Yes.
You're not allowed to carry at one time. You are allowed the rules to change some, but I remember when that discussion was going on at school, my ag building was built a foot over on highway property. They didn't realize it, but the corner of the building belonged to the highway department. But the rules say you got so many feet, you can't have a concealed carry or a weapon in your truck. I'm going hunting in the morning. I got my deer rifle laying there, which is very legal. But as I go by the school, I just broke the law because the law says I can't have it within so many feet of a school. But I'm going down the highway that they require me to travel. You break laws that don't make any sense sometimes. Cell phones, yeah. Those rules have changed so many times, I don't even know what the rules are anymore. Right. In some states, you can't even have them on, period, when you're in the cars. It just depends on where you're at. So, yeah, we got laws that we don't even know we break daily because we've added so many to it. 27, someone.
I'll read that one.
All right.
That's always amazed me that Jesus would say something. He got your attention, didn't he?
He did.
What worst thing could you say? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness.
Yep. He keeps telling them over and over and over, you are presenting one person, one look to somebody, and you're actually living a totally different way. All right? Again, we've got to be careful about that too. Don't we put on what we call our airs? Isn't that what they say? I want to look a certain way. I want to be thought of as a certain way, even though I know I've got problems in other areas. We've got to be careful.
That's such a good analogy, though. You see those white tombs, they're so clean and pristine, but yet they have these bones inside of them.
They got decaying bodies inside of them.
Pretty bad.
So, yep. And again, he's kind of slapping them around pretty hard here.
When you have asked forgiveness of your sins, but yet you've sinned somewhere and you don't know that you have, I've often wondered about that.
Well, again, in your prayers, I always include in my prayers, Lord, if I did something that I didn't know about or I wasn't aware of,
Yes.
please forgive me for that.
Amen.
Because we do. There's things that we just don't know. Aren't we told to follow the laws of the land, the government? And Kenny just said it's almost impossible you go through a day without breaking one of the laws. If you know there's a law, or if there's a law and you break it, it's a sin. It just is. No matter how, and again, there's no degrees. We want to put degrees on how bad a sin is. Now, they may have more effect. Some sins will have more effect on others than some, but we've got to be, a sin's a sin.
Yeah, miles per hour is my trouble.
Yeah. It does, all of us.
First John talks about if you walk in the light, he's faithful to forgive you. So if you are truly trying to follow his word, he's going to take care of that.
Sure.
It's the people who are just, I'll do what I want to do and I'm all right.
Right.
You know, that's
Verse 30 is what's gonna bring it home to us.
All right. Somebody read, was it 29? All right.
Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore, ye be witnesses unto yourselves, that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Therefore, behold, I send unto you prophets, and wise men, and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill, and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel, from the blood of Zacharias, son of Barcichas, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which appear unto thee, how often would I have gathered my children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens out of her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. For I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth, till ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord.
How many times have we told ourselves that if we were witnesses to the Exodus, witness to all the miracles that God did, all the plagues that he did, and how he protected his children, we would not have acted that way? Right. Every time we sin, we do. And then how many of us told us, if we were in that crowd, we got caught up in that crowd at Jesus' trial, and everybody was hollering, crucify Jesus, crucify. How many of us would have hollered the same thing? Just like Peter did. Peter forgot. We're all weak, and we do these things. So we can't say that I would have never done that. We would like to think we wouldn't, but we're people. And God knows it. And he says here, you got to be careful, guys. You got to be very careful, because you're going to kill my prophets. I'm going to send you some. And he's talking about the apostles here and the other disciples that God sent. Because the apostles themselves sent individuals out with the powers they had, right? They bestowed the powers on them to do these things, to do the miracles. Yet, what did the people do? I don't want to hear that. I don't want to see that. I want nothing to do with you. Matter of fact, you're causing me some problems, so I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to get rid of you. And that's exactly what they did. And then he said, I tried and I tried and I tried to bring you, and he's talking to the Jews, to bring you under my wings, to protect you, yet you kept turning away from me, didn't you? Over and over and over. How many times do we do the same things? God tells us he's going to protect us. He'll forgive us. He'll help us. But yet we turn our back on him every time we see him. So we've got to be careful. We're going to have to stop there today. Again, I will not be here next week. I will be in San Antonio. I ask y'all pray for me as we travel. I'm traveling with my shooting team down there for a state competition. But we'll be back the following Wednesday. So,
Safe travel.
thank you.